Amateur radio call sign is Whiskey 6 Alpha Hotel. This is WaveTalkers Live. This is going to be episode number 84. Today we are talking about responding to disasters, the various roles and actions that each of us would take on during a disaster. Today I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Dan NR6V and David W0DHG. Let's get right into today's topic. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to this, bring myself up onto screen. We'll jump into today's question, and let me pull the guys down. There we go. So if you have access to Winlink, send us a Winlink check-in. Use the standard Winlink check-in form. Send it to all three of our call signs, W0DHG, NR6V, W6AH, and our tactical address, WaveTalkers. In the comment section of that form, let us know what is one action that you have taken in response to a disaster. Let's go and walk through how to send in that check-in together real quick. What you're going to do is you're going to open up your copy of Winlink Express, and here in the upper left-hand corner, you're going to click on the new message button. That's going to spring open the new message window. It's going to look pretty much like any other email you've ever sent before. Down here is the select template. Go ahead and click on that select template, and it should bring up your template manager. You want to click the little plus sign next to standard templates. Come on down here to the bottom where you find general forms. It's right down there. Go ahead and give that a click. And a little lower below that, you'll find Winlink check-in.txt. That's the new version of the form, new as earlier this summer. Go ahead and give that a double click, and if the demo gods are with you, it should open up your web browser of choice. Here you want to go ahead and fill out the information that's on this form. Always, always, always begin by clicking here in the date and time field. Click on that field, and it will set the form to your computer's current date and time. It's really important to make sure that the mapping all works correctly when you do this. So make sure you do that. Click OK. Then here in the to field, this is where you're going to put in all of our call signs, which would be W0DHG, NR6V, W6AH, and our tactical address, WaveTalkers. Just separate each of those with a semicolon. You'll fill out the from, the station contact name, that's going to be your name, and any additional operators that are there with you. Just go ahead and list out what their call signs are. Here's the session section. You can say that this is an exercise. Let us know which service you're going to be sending that in on, whether it be the amateur radio service or shares. Let us know which band you're sending it on. If you're going to send it via the internet, go ahead and use the telnet option. Or if you're sending it via RF, go ahead and select which version of RF mode you're going to be doing. Here's the session type. Here's the telnet or any of those different session types you may be using. Use the location information that's found here. Go ahead and fill that out. And then down here in the comment section, this is where you want to let us know what is one of the actions that you have taken in response to a disaster. After you type that in, go ahead and paste it in the chat, whether it is here inside of the live audience for Zoom or out on the YouTube channel if you're watching us on YouTube. And if you're watching it times shifted, so you're watching it after we've already done the live show, go ahead and leave us a comment and let us know what one action that you've taken in the comment section there of the video. It's really helpful to be able to see that and see what everybody's done. Once you finish filling this out, hit the submit button. Your browser will give you a couple of pop-up windows. Go ahead and click OK through each of those until your browser goes blank. When that goes blank, go ahead and close the window, and you should see all of the information from your form populated here inside of your message. Go ahead and hit the post to outbox button. That's there in the upper left. And then up here in the upper right, you want to open the session and go ahead and send your traffic. I'm going to click the start button, and we'll see if any traffic is coming in. It looks like we have quite a few check-ins that are coming in from all over the world. So I'll go ahead and download those. Later in the show, we're going to check back in on this, and we will map in all of the check-ins that have come in at that time. But for now, let me bring myself back up to screen, and let's get into today's topic. So today we are talking about responding to disasters, the various different roles and actions that we may need to take as emergency communicators and as hams. So let's see. So there are basically two types of disasters that we're talking about here. The first is those disasters where there is some level of warning prior to the disaster taking place, and those disasters that happen suddenly. There's essentially little to no warning at all. When you think about the grand scheme of things, most disasters that are going to be taking place, the vast majority are ones that are going to have some level of warning. If it's a weather event, it might be a couple of hours, it might be a couple of days. Some events only have a few minutes of warning. Those tend to start shifting over into the suddenly happening. There are certainly other events that will take place suddenly, and you need to be ready to be able to react to those in some kind of way and react appropriately. When we're talking about the warning system that comes out from what you're going to be monitoring, you're looking to maintain your awareness. What you want to do is you want to identify and track whatever the leading indicators are for this particular type of a disaster that you're having to deal with. I like to think of this as keeping my finger on the pulse of what's going on for the disaster. As an emergency communicator, this is probably one of your most essential roles, is making sure that you know what is going on and the kind of scope of things that are happening so that you're able to respond safely and appropriately as the needs arise. A lot of times we refer to this as situational awareness. It's kind of the most common term that we would use for this particular type of awareness, is situational awareness. And if you go back a couple of weeks, Dan did a great talk about monitoring public safety radio in order to maintain your own situational awareness. It's a great episode to go back and check out if you've missed that. So what actions do you take? Well, the actions are going to really depend on two primary things. And the first thing that the action that you take is going to be perhaps most dependent on is your proximity to the impact zone. Where are you in relation to the area that is currently being affected or is likely to be affected? A lot of times we'll refer to this impact zone as the donut hole or the area inside of where the event is happening. Usually these are people who are impacted in some sort of way. They're inside of the donut hole. And this is typically where you find all of the victims. They're going to be inside of whatever this particular disaster zone or impact zone happens to be. There are also those of us who are outside of the disaster zone, and these are people who are considered not impacted. Now, this is perhaps one of your also biggest keys to success in being an emergency communicator, and that is to not become a victim yourself. This is one of your primary goals. Don't become a victim if you can help it. And one of the best ways to avoid becoming a victim is to not self-deploy. Don't just grab your stuff and go head into the disaster zone, the hot zone, the red zone, the warm zone, whatever it happens to, whatever you want to call it. Don't go rushing in. Go only when you are called and tasked to do so very specifically. When we were thinking about the early stages of this episode, and we were talking, one of the things that we were running through various different scenarios of, as an operator, do we send people into harm's way in order to create some kind of support that's there? In some situations that might be acceptable. In other cases, it may not be acceptable to send someone into a particular zone. In other cases, it may not be even possible. We start thinking about very large earthquakes. If we keep thinking about the big one, if it hits here in the Southern California area, there's a very high likelihood that it doesn't matter how prepared you are, you're not going to be able to traverse from one side of the city to another to get to a location where you need to deploy. So these are all things to start keeping in mind as you are preparing for some sort of a deployment. So the next action that you're going to take, or the other indicator for an action is you're going to take, is related to your sphere of influence and responsibility. What are you responsible for, and where do you fall in the overall chain of command of responsibility for taking some kind of action? This, no matter where you fall in that list, this always begins with you and your own personal safety and well-being. If you are not safe, if you are not able to provide any support for yourself, if you are a victim, there is no way that you can help others in that situation. So taking an immediate inventory of your own personal safety, the area around you, your own well-being, whether or not what your level of preparedness is, whether you are physically and or mentally fit to be able to deal with the situation, or do you need assistance in getting yourself out, having any aid rendered to you as well. This is where it all begins for each of us, regardless of the disaster that's taking place. The next level out in this sphere of influence would be your immediate family, such as family members, pets, your property, making sure that's safe, making sure they're taken care of, they're provided for. Do you need to evacuate your family? Making sure that you've got everybody and are able to get out of the house, get out to a safe area, move to a shelter, whatever it happens to be. The next level out from that would then be your local community, your immediate neighbors. That might be the person who lives next door. It might be the older couple or individual who lives down the street or around the block from you, making sure that the critical people around you are safe and are able to get themselves out of the situation if they need to, have the care, have what they need to survive. One of the best things you can do a lot of times is literally just stay put if the situation, if the disaster is such that that is a viable option for you, or you might need to evacuate. The next level out from that would be your larger community. This is where you start seeing the role start to shift, where you might need to start reaching out to your team. That may be an Aries team, or an ACS, or a RACES team, or an EmComm team, or whatever that group happens to be. You may be able at that point to support a larger area of your town, your city, or so forth. This might be just your building, the block that you live on, whatever your particular situation happens to be. But you can see now you're as each inside layer is taken care of, you're able to expand out where you're able to support. But you're doing this methodically, and you're really kind of checking and constantly monitoring overall what's going on to verify that each layer in as you go along are able to be covered. Finally, you may have on an outside of your sphere of influence, the overall response effort. And this may take into account your role. This might be a leadership role. You might be one of the leads on a team. And what is your responsibility in the event of a planned emergency, or not a planned, but in the event of an emergency happening? What does the plan dictate where your level of responsibility happens to be? Even if you're a leader in any of these organizations, you need to make sure that those inner circles are all taken care of as well. But for most of us, for the vast majority of ham radio operators, emergency communicators, radio operators, if you will, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be monitoring the situation, monitoring our radio, monitoring primary sources, whatever they happen to be. We may be monitoring, sending in reports, field situation reports, or other ground proofing information from the ground. A lot of these are going to come through Winlink itself, or via other means. And we want to maintain our level of preparedness as we maintain our level of situational awareness. Make sure that your go kit is ready, and all of those sorts of things that you're going to need to do in case you are called upon to come in and provide additional assistance beyond what is already happening at your local level. So one of the common questions you need to constantly be asking yourself, are you in harm's way? And to talk a little bit more about this, I want to go back to February 27th, 2010. At the time, I was living on my boat in Ventura Harbor, and there was a magnitude 8.8 earthquake that happened about 4,000 miles away. It took place in Chile, and the earthquake was a huge magnitude, and it sent out a tsunami across the Pacific Basin. Now, I was nowhere near in the disaster zone when this event occurred. I happened to be at home. I happened to be on the boat this day, and I think I was watching some of the online forums or news sites, and I heard about this earthquake that had taken place. So I started watching the news, and there was a report that was happening in Hawaii at the time. And the reporter was noting that here comes this tsunami. It had been traveling, and I think it was somewhere around 12 or 14 hours after the event had taken place. And the reporter noted that they were expecting the wave to be rolling into Hawaii at any moment, and they were going to turn the cameras and point it out to the harbor and watch this wave start to roll in. As I'm sitting there, the graphic that you see here on screen this is from NOAA, and it was down in the lower right-hand corner of the newscast. And it was somewhere around something like this particular your graphic here. And as I'm looking at it, I realized that I'm located roughly here in Southern California in Ventura. And I started to look at where Hawaii was, and I followed this line across the Pacific Ocean in this little teeny tiny thumbnail of a graphic. And I realized at that point, I was on the same track, the same path as to where the tsunami was headed in the Northern Hemisphere. And when that happened, I thought to myself, let's go ahead and evaluate this data. What is a leading indicator? What is some kind of ground proofing that I might be able to do to tell whether or not I am actually in harm's way? There's realization of I may actually be in the path of a tsunami. And so what I did was I stuck my head up out of the boat, and I looked into the middle of the harbor, and there's a little small channel marker that floats right in the middle of the harbor, not far from where my boat is. And what I noticed was the channel marker was laying down on its side, and it was pointing out to sea. And this was the moment that I realized that when I was in college and I got my degree in marine biology, that suddenly a lecture that had taken place some many years ago reminded me that as a tsunami approaches land, the water is drawn out to sea. As that wave starts to come in, it pulls all of the water away from the land and it sucks it out. So if you're standing on the beach and all of a sudden the water starts immediately receding back, it's probably not Godzilla. It is probably a tsunami that is coming towards you. And the thing to do is to turn and immediately take action. So at the time, I happened to be on board. I just had my dog was on board with me, and that was it. So I grabbed my dog. That was the only thing I had time to grab, and run down the dock and begin warning all of my neighbors that, hey, there's a tsunami coming. This was a very immediate action, banging on hulls as we ran down the dock, and literally just screaming to people that, hey, there's a tsunami coming. Everybody needs to get out of here and get up to higher ground because it was coming in. As we took that action, all of us liveaboards. Now, at the marina that I was at, there's only about 10% liveaboards. And so it's a very tight-knit community. We all know each other. So we all gathered together up at the gathering place, which happens to be the flagpole right up near the gate. And we took inventory to make sure that everybody was there. All of our pets got off the boats, all of the children who were in the area. And we were monitoring the situation immediately to know, did we need to then immediately get in our vehicles and drive further inland away from the shore? The biggest key to survivability in a tsunami is to get to higher ground as quickly as you can, to get out of the path of what is coming your way. So we also started taking a resource assessment, started taking inventory of what did we have? Did anybody have their go bag? Not a single person had time to grab a go bag at all. I think one person had a first aid kit that they had managed to grab, and one person had a marine radio. So the next thing that we started to do was started to assess the impacts of what was going on. This is actually about 2 hours after the event started to take place. What we were seeing there in the harbor was we were seeing a tidal surge as the tsunami would roll into the harbor. It created this big surge where the harbor would rise about 2.5 meters, 7 to 9 feet. Every 20 minutes, the water would flush into the harbor and then rush back out. The boats, our boats tied to the dock. This is actually a picture of my boat tied to the dock, and the knot meter on board was reading over 9 knots. Now, why is that important? It's important because many of our sailboats can only travel under motor power at about 6 to 7 knots, which means our boats were traveling faster tied to the dock than what our boats were capable of being traveling if we were under power, which means any one of our boats, if they were out in the harbor, was going to be a liability. We were going to be floating debris at that point that could be knocking into anyone else. This is a picture of Island Packers, which is a great big large commercial catamaran that had managed to make it back into the harbor. And even though this is a great big boat with huge external engines, they were being pushed around like a rubber ducky, just floating in the harbor because there was so much current. There was so much force by the water moving through all of this area. And so this became a major concern. We started really monitoring the situation. We were actively monitoring the situation. And when you do that, what you want to be monitoring for is the most relevant primary source of information that you can possibly get your hands on. A couple of weeks ago, when Dan was talking about situational awareness, he was focused in on listening to public safety radio using scanners. In this case, we were down at the harbor, and the most relevant information that we could get, notice we're not on channel 19, which is the emergency frequency. We were monitoring channel 17, which is actually the frequency that the Harbor Patrol there in Ventura County would be transmitting on. So we were listening to the most relevant information that we could get at the time. And you should be doing the same thing, whether that be the weather service, whether that be your local repeaters, whether it be the dispatch or command channels that are going on. Make sure that you're monitoring whatever that primary source happens to be. Next would be to report as appropriately as you can your own well-being and your own direct observations. Don't report hearsay. Don't report what somebody down the dock said. You're only reporting what your direct observations are, and you're doing this based on for your own well-being and for direct observation. So first of all, if you have access to your cell phone, if the cell phone towers are even active, one of the things that we oftentimes want to do is let our significant other, our parents, our children, our distant contacts, let them know that we're okay. And instead of calling on the phone, send a text message. Text messages are much smaller. They likely will go through, and they're not going to overload the systems, the telecom systems, as quickly. So this is both a way for you to more ensure that your message gets out, but also not create as much of a challenge for other responders, other folks who are in that disaster zone to be able to deal with that. So that's one of the things. And so this is a great time to then reach out to your out of area contact, let them know, hey, I'm okay, because more than likely they're starting to hear about this sort of thing on the news as well at that point. The next is, if you've got your ham radio, sign into your local repeater, whatever that happens to be, or whatever the frequency that your group has identified as a common gathering place for your particular group. This might be joining onto a local EmComm net that you have. It might be a particular simplex frequency that your group has identified. It might be an HF simplex frequency because of the terrain where your area is at. It might be something like VARA AC, where you're getting on a chat with the local folks in your area and so forth. But you want to start to monitor and start being in connection with the folks that are on your team, provided you're safe at that point. The next thing that you may want to send in reports through would be something like Winlink. And with Winlink, you can start sending in wellness reports. This might be a case where the cell signals are out and you're trying to get a message out, or you're trying to get messages out for other people that are there with you. So in our situation, when we were gathered up at the flagpole, maybe if I had my station set up at that point, we could have, and if the cell towers were down, maybe we send some Winlink messages to real world email addresses to some of the people to let their family and friends know that, hey, they're okay and they're in a safe spot as well. You may want to send field situation reports in. These are oftentimes directed by the leadership within your group, whether or not your group has been activated in some form or another. A lot of times, hams can be most effective when we are not gathered together in a place like an EOC, but we're actually distributed out to various different locations. So we can provide that real world ground proofing information that's out in the field and send that information into another location. This is a great way for being really helpful in the event of a situation. Sending in did you feel it reports. In this case, did you feel it report? This was actually for a tsunami, even though the earthquake had happened. Coming up in a couple of weeks is going to be the Great Shakeout exercise, and we're going to do a live show during that shakeout. And next week we're also going to be doing a show to help you prepare for participating in the shakeout as well. And we'll walk through a DYFI, or did you feel it report. Those reports go directly to the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey. If you're a Skywarn member, perhaps the thing that you're going to be sending in are weather reports and ground proofing weather reports. Again, see how these are all related to your particular role, the area that your area of influence happens to be, and your level of responsibility. Another place to reach out and send in reports to would be your own mentors. Maybe it's some of the more experienced hams in your group. Maybe it's an Elmer or somebody who has been working with you to help you become more effective as an emergency communicator. They're great people to reach out to get advice and guidance as to what you should be doing in the event of an emergency. Check your own playbook if your team has a playbook as to what this particular emergency suggests that you should be doing at that point. But again, one of the biggest keys here is to maintain your own situational awareness. Identify and track whatever the leading indicators for this particular emergency happen to be, and you're waiting to be called. I know this is one of the most challenging things for a lot of us, and that is we feel like, well, I need to rush out and go be able to do something, take some active role, but that's not actually what you want to be doing. You want to be waiting to be called, reaching out, be aware of the situation, maintain all of that situational awareness, deal with what needs to happen down at your local level. With all of that said, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to turn this over to Dan and our 6V to talk about, for those of you who are more experienced or maybe part of another team where you are being activated, what are some of the things that you would be doing at that level? So let me bring Dan up to screen.
Well, thank you, Chris. So I'm talking here mostly from the perspective of someone who's serving a government agency. In other words, you're a RACES group or something similar. And really, mostly it's probably the same response that you might get if you were an ARES member or a member of a similar group to that. But there are some differences that I think may be important. One of them is that most EmComm groups tend to be recovery oriented. In other words, they're reacting to an event that has occurred and not really responding to the event. It's kind of a subtle difference, but you might be in the role of responding in the initial stages, or at least providing information that helps your served agency respond. You know, in the case of my ACS group, we would likely be have some folks stationed in the EOC, and we would have others out in the field providing field situation reports to help with the response to the incident, as opposed to, you know, a Red Cross worker who's basically in the shelter and working to help folks recover. If you're in a group like mine, a RACES type group, you may have a formal command and control, which is very different. In other words, a chain of command that you have to follow, and that may involve your activation. In my group, we try to stick to chain of command pretty strictly. As an example, we just had a CERT, one of our local CERT groups reached out to us and said, could you help us with a drill? We're going to have a bunch of inexperienced radio operators. Could you come along and shadow them and help them? And of course, our answer is yes, but we told the CERT people, have your CERT commander, who's a captain with the fire department, request it formally through our captain, and then it would come down the chain of command to us. In the past, we would have just said, yeah, we'll do it, and done that. But we're trying to stick to that chain of command to get all of our people used to dealing with the chain of command, because in a fire department, in a police department, that is really important to them. As a member of a RACES type group, you may have more formalized reporting. There may be specific forms that your agency wants you to use, may want you to report certain things. And so that might be different than an ARES or other group. Chris mentioned unexpected versus expected events, and they're mostly going to be the same, but there are some key differences. For an expected event, in either case, you're not going to self-deploy. That is a basic tenet of what we do. But with an expected event, you do have the luxury of preparing. And I'm not talking about your overall preparedness. I'm talking about specific preparation for that event. That might be in the form of staging equipment, assigning members, and that would relate to not only for that initial response, but that's sort of putting folks on notice that, you know, we're holding you back for deployment period 2 or 3, and where we're going to send you. And Chris talked about the issue of putting people in harm's way by having them respond. And we recently had Hurricane Hillary, which was a really unique event for us in Southern California. We don't have that kind of weather. The last tropical storm to hit Southern California was 1939. And so we do not have experience with that. So it was a pretty big deal here. And in preparing for that, and we knew on Wednesday that the storm was expected to hit on Sunday. So we had quite a bit of time to prepare this. And so we really thought about what we're going to do with our members, and in a way that we really hadn't before. Are we going to have members from the outskirts drive through arguably really terrible weather to get to a fixed location? Or would we better off leaving them at home and having them provide field situation reports on an ongoing basis? And in that decision process, we did decide with several of our members to do that, even though they were more than willing to respond to one of our fixed locations, we decided to have them stay home. We had enough people close by that we were able to get by. The main thing is you get to work with that pre-deployment preparation. You get to work with your agency and find out, for this particular kind of event, are there differences than what we planned for? We really had never prepared for a weather event. Our preparation really was mostly for earthquakes and wildfires. And so we really needed to talk to our emergency management department and find out, okay, in this kind of event, what's different? What kind of information do you need that we wouldn't provide you in a wildfire, we wouldn't provide you in an earthquake? So the other thing is, you've got to prepare your family to deal with the event when it finally happens without you. Because if you deploy and are away from home when the event hits, they're going to have to deal with it without you. And that's a key difference between an expected event and an unexpected event. You're going to have to prepare them or work with them so they know what to do when you're not there, because they may not be able to reach you, or you may not be able to help them even if they were able to get a hold of you. Your served agency may give you some specific marching orders. This is what we want you to do. This is what we want first. Certainly in an emergency management department situation, the key thing in the early stages is going to be getting those field situation reports into them. They cannot respond to a disaster without knowing what's going on in the field. And in a city like Los Angeles, where I'm at, it's a big city, and what happens in one point of the city may be very different than what happens in another. So we'll have those specific marching orders. When it comes to unexpected events, again, no self-deployment. Your first concern is always your family's safety and your safety. So you're going to work on that before you even think about responding in your EmComm capacity. Make sure they're safe. Make sure your neighborhood's safe, because if your neighbors aren't safe, it might affect you. I remember watching the Map Your Neighborhood program, and which I was very impressed with. And one of the things that they did in that I thought was crazy until I really thought about it, but that was they told you, once you're sure you don't have a fire at your house, take your fire extinguisher out and put it on the sidewalk in front of your house. And of course, my first thought is somebody's going to steal it. But they pointed out, which made perfect sense, is if your neighbor's house is on fire and it's not dealt with when it's small, it's going to be a problem for you. That fire extinguisher that you don't need right now might save you from ever having to need it. So think about that plan, exercise. Hopefully you've got an existing plan, modify the plan as you need to, but make sure that your family is secure before you have any thoughts about moving on to that next level. Chris talked about the concentric circles. The inner circle is the most important. Once you're sure everything's okay and you're waiting to be deployed, you want to begin gathering ground truth. And that's both circumstances around your home, but also starting to listen to your group's nets. Start listening to public safety radios. Know what's going on. Chris pointed it out, and I couldn't agree more, that one of our most important jobs as emergency communicators is to have our finger on the pulse of what's happening. And that involves probably many different things, but the more you know about what's going on around you, the better you can serve your agency. As I pointed out, early hours of an event, the information is going to be mostly flowing from the field into your served agency, as opposed to the other way around. And if you're stuck at home, weather keeps it from making it safe for you to travel, or it's an earthquake and the roads are impassable, You may be serving your agency and your community best by staying home, being a good witness, and not responding. One of the things we were taught in training for law enforcement is if you're off duty and you see something, you're most likely best to be a good witness. If you try to respond, you're really at a disadvantage. You don't have a radio, you don't have backup, you don't have all the tools with you, but you can be a really good witness. And so this is kind of the same thing. If you can't respond, or your group hasn't asked you to respond yet, or maybe you're in that second deployment period, that doesn't mean that until that happens, you can't be very, very useful by being good eyes and ears. And the bottom line is, we talked a few shows ago about having a playbook and standard operating procedures. And that, whether it's an expected event or an unexpected event, your standard operating procedures are going to be your go-to in terms of responding. You may not get a lot of direction from your served agency or from others in your group, and that's where you've got to fall back on that playbook. And I was impressed enough about what Chris talked about in that episode that we're now specifically working on playbooks for all of our fixed locations that we have. And I think that's going to be incredibly helpful in the future. And that's all I've got. And I'm going to throw it over now to David, who's going to talk about what it might be like if you were in a leadership role in an EmComm group. So David, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. So, a lot of what both Chris and Dan has already talked about, apply to all of the different groups. And I have a leadership role in our Aries organization, and it's a little different because Aries is, it's a volunteer organization. And while we have MOUs with certain hospitals and other county organizations, it's not like a direct ACS type of relationship like Dan's group that works directly with the LA City Fire Department. We serve at their request, and sometimes the requests come, and sometimes they don't. And the big rule is, just like in all the other organizations, you'll never self-deploy. But as a leader, we interact with all of the agencies that we serve on a regular basis, so that we have good relationships formed with them. And when there does come a call, when there is a disaster, there is a need for service, as a leader, you have to stop, you have to step back, you'll have to reach out to your folks and figure out who's available and when. And depending on the kind of disaster in Southern California, everybody knows if we have an earthquake, you check your house, you check your family, make sure everything's okay, and then you check in on the radio and let folks know, hey, are you available or you're not available? And we start to do an inventory of what resources we have and who could be deployed at what areas. At the same time, as a leader, we're looking at reaching out to our served agencies to check in with them, to make sure that they're okay, to see what their needs might be. And you start making a list, a table of, hey, I need an operator here, I need an operator there, and depending on where I have hospitals that I need service for, I may need other operators in the field to relay to other locations the needs that those hospitals have, because just because you have somebody there doesn't mean you can get the message out. So you start building a list of who needs what and who's available. And then, as a leader, your team, and hopefully you're practicing on a regular basis, you're training on a regular basis, the people that you have, their capabilities. Hopefully you challenge all of them to grow their skills over time and improve their skill set and their gear and their equipment, and know what they have and know how to use it. And then in that disaster, you start to slowly roll out the resources that you have as they become available. And I think, as Dan said earlier on, you might have 20 people show up. Hey, I'm ready to go. I'm available, and I want to serve. And that's great. You may only deploy 5 or 6 or 7 of them, depending on what the served agency needs immediately. Because as a leader, you need to think, I send those 5 or 6, 7 guys out. 8 hours later at the end of, a work shift, I'm going to need to replace them with somebody else. And then 8 hours after that, I may need to replace them with somebody else. So you have to kind of not only plan for what's in the here and now, but what does it look like next shift, the shift after, in a day or in 2 days. And you need to be really clear with your personnel. Hey, we want you, we need you, but right now the most important thing you can do is be there for your family, get some rest, get prepared, and check back in with us with a couple of hours so that we can deploy you after the first round of folks have been in the field and did the service that they needed to do, so that they can either take a break and stay on station there but off shift, or go home and rest and relax so that they can be available later on. Those things are really important. Working with your people to understand what they can and can't do is for me, it's just as important as my radio skills, because I'm only one person. You can only put me in one place. But if I've really worked with and trained the 20 to 30 other individuals that are in our organization and know what they can do, it becomes a force multiplier. And having them understand, hey, you need to have a go bag. You need to have self-sufficiency for yourself for maybe 72 hours. And I'm not going to ask you to go out and work for 72 hours, but I may ask you to go out there and work some shifts where you may be on for 8 hours. And then we're going to ask you to take a nap or a rest. And whether it's in the back of the car or a tent you bring or a sleeping bag or whatever it is, we may ask you to just bring all your gear out so that you may be at that location for as long as you're willing to. Because again, our organization's all volunteers. I can't order anybody anywhere. Nobody's signed a contract to say that they're willing to pick up and go at any given time. And the served agencies, you got to keep talking to them as well. Is what they have after you've deployed the first shift, is it enough? Is it too much? Are they doing okay? Are things getting better or getting worse at their location, such that you may only need a shift or two to support them and then they're all good, but it may be that things are getting worse there, or they have other problems that they need to deal with, and maybe you need to bring more people in to support what their needs are over time. So it's really important to know your people, make sure they all get checked in after that event happens, and then figure out how to deploy them. Now, there's other disasters that happen where it's not really clear. We've had power outages in the San Fernando Valley, and if you're in the zone where the power's out, obviously you know, but if you're outside of that, you may be unaware that there's a problem. So having some kind of alerting system, and when we use a system where we record people's text message, their phones, and the carrier they have, and we can push a couple buttons and send out a message to all of our folks to say, hey, there's been a disaster. If you're available, please hop on the radio and check in and let us know your status, and we'll get you up to speed on what the problem might be to see how you can be of service to the city. That system works great if all the infrastructure's working and you can get the message out, or somebody can get in to that system to activate it. And there's people spread all across the county that can do it. And we use that as much as we can if there are activations that we need to have. And understand that you need to test a system like that on a regular basis, because if you're not testing on a regular basis, people don't understand that when that thing goes off, it's serious, that you need to pay attention to what the message is, and you need to be comfortable with what the ask is, and know that it's not spam, it's not junk mail, it's not something to ignore. It's a request for help and service. So I think that's it as a leader. Work with your people, understand what it is, constant communications with your served agency in good times and bad. Building that relationship when things are good will really help when there are problems, so that they know that they can rely on you. They know who you are, you know who they are. It helps make things go a lot smoother once you get to deployment. So I think that's it for me. I'd roll it back to Chris and Dan.
Hey, thanks a lot, David and Dan. Great job of walking through all of that information. As you can tell, there's a lot of different roles that a lot of us will fill in the event of an emergency. And this is all about where your role is within your various different organizations. What's your level of responsibility? but a huge amount of it really comes down to your ability to monitor the situation, be very self-aware about your current conditions, making sure you're safe, you're not becoming a victim. That's a huge goal. Don't become a victim in any of these. Do not self-deploy, because if you self-deploy, the likelihood of you becoming a victim and somebody else needing to put themselves in harm's way to come save you is not the thing that any of us want to be involved with or associated with in any way. So with that said, let's go ahead and check in on where the check-ins have come in at. I'm going to jump back over to my PC here. And I've been checking the check-ins quite a bit throughout the time here. If you have not had a chance to send in your Winlink check-in, go ahead and do that now. And I'll go ahead and do a couple of quick checks here. I'll open up my session and do a couple of more quick checks to make sure that we've gotten all of the messages in. Kilo November 4, Echo India Kilo, got your test message. Thanks a lot for sending that in. I'll go ahead and download that. And we'll go ahead and we'll do another check here since we did get one in. And looks like I've got them all now at this point. So in that case, I'm going to come up here onto the toolbar. I'm going to click on the little globe icon, the little map icon. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up this maps and CSV KML files and for forms. And here at the top, we're able to select what is the form that we want to map. Now, in order to make this feature work inside of Winlink, you need to have received the message. And since I received all of these, I'm going to come down here to the Winlink check-in V5, which is the current version of the check-in form. If you want to see how this works just on your own Winlink system, you can come up here and select messages, and you'll see a map that shows all of the messages that you've received. But we're going to check in on the Winlink check-in V5 form, and then down here at the bottom where it says display map, I'll just go ahead and give that a click, and then blow that out to full screen so we can see the global view. We'll start over here in Hawaii. It looks like we have Whiskey Hotel 6, Foxtrot, Quebec joining us, as well as Bill, Kilo Hotel 6, Uniform. Thanks for joining us out there from the islands of Hawaii. Aloha to you all. Down here in New Zealand, we've got Terry, ZL1HOG, and Station Victor Kilo 2. Sierra Kilo Yankee joining us from Australia. Thanks a lot for joining us and sending in your check-in. Looks like we also have Franz here in Austria and Roland joining us in Germany. Let's go ahead and zoom in on North America. I'll click the zoom in feature a couple of times. I'm going to use the right mouse button to click and drag with that right mouse button. That allows you to pan a map over to get a better view. We'll roll over a few of these other ones. We've got a couple of operators here in Canada. They're pretty close to each other, so a little hard to see them. Here's another one up here. Victor Echo 3 ZDR, another station here in Toronto area. Quite a few stations joining us from north of the border there in Canada. Thanks a lot for joining us and checking in. This was like Ed in Ohio, Rory there in Virginia. I'm going to roll over several more of these where we have operators. Looks like there's Lloyd joining us, another station down here, one over in Georgia, several down here in Florida that are joining us. We've got stations here in Texas. Hey, King, thanks a lot for joining us there. Station here in Kansas joining us, regular here in Colorado. Looks like Dave here in Idaho, station up here in Montana. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the Pacific Northwest a little bit because we got quite a few stations that are up there. Real quick, make sure everybody is able to see their check-ins that have come in. Here's some of these stations that are sending in their check-ins. There's Bill there, just south of Tacoma, and quite a few other stations. It looks like there might be two right here. Nope, just one station down here. Let's again right click and drag in order to pan the map around when you've got yourself zoomed in. Here, a station in southern Utah. Hey, I'll be out there in Heber City starting tomorrow. I'll be out there all week for those of you who are out in the Utah area, Salt Lake City area. There's a station out here just outside of Death Valley area. And we've got stations here up in the Piedmont that are checking in, and the Sacramento area that are joining us. Come on down here station coming in from shares is really nice to see. Dan being able to send in a check-in. One of the nice things about Winlink is you can send traffic from either shares or from amateur radio and pass traffic back and forth. And there's a variety of other services that are out there that are all using Winlink. Let me zoom in a little tighter on Southern California here so we can see all of the stations that are checking in here in the LA area. There's Craig, KJ6IJJ, many other stations that are all joining us. There's Logan. Hey, Logan, great to see you. And KD6ASL. Lots of great stations that are all in there. Hopefully everyone was able to see your check-in and got that in. If you're watching this on YouTube later in the week, go ahead and still send in your check-in. We'll still map it throughout the week, and we always check all of the responses that are coming in. If you find the information that we're putting out there to be helpful, please consider going onto our YouTube channel, go onto the episode, like the episode, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. It certainly helps the algorithm to let YouTube know that we're out there, and we'll share the content with more users. If you really find the information helpful, consider going on to WaveTalkers.com. Click that buy us a coffee link. It really helps support what we're doing here on the show. It keeps all the lights on to keep everything up and running. With that, what I'd like to do is bring the guys back up to screen, and we'll do a quick little go around for any closing thoughts that folks have. Dan, let's start off with you, NR6V. Any closing thoughts from this week?
Not really. I think kind of regardless of what type of agency you serve, most of what we do is the same, but there will be specifics and some differences between different agencies. The main thing is to make sure your group has good standard operating procedures. Everybody knows them and practices with them, and you'll have a good result.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. David, W0DHG, any closing thoughts from you this week?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely what Dan says, having processes and procedures, knowing what they are, drilling them into your people and practicing is really key. And practice all across the board, practice activating, getting people to understand how you're going to call them up and what they're going to do, and practice what it is you're going to do. In Aries, we do a number of like real live drills every year, not as many as I'd like, but it's hard to sometimes get people out. Get them out there, get people out in the field, give them an opportunity to test out their gear. We do a weekly net, and a weekly net makes sure your radio works every week. You know where to find us, you know how to find us. A lot of times that's folks do that with the gear that's sitting just like I do. It's on my desk here. It's permanently mounted here. Not that often do people go and get that go box that they're going to take when they deploy in the field. And I try to make sure at least once a quarter, if not more often than that, when I check in on my Monday night nets or some of the other nets, I go out and do it from the driveway with the gear that I'm going to have to haul out to a location. And it's really important that that gear works, because that's the gear that you're going to get out there. You're going to be 10, 20, 30 miles from home that you may or may not have touched in a while, and you don't want to take it out and find out something's not working.
One of the things that we didn't mention is for operators that are Winlink gateway sys operators, system operators for Winlink gateway. Ensure that your gateway is running properly on a regular basis. Do some tests of it. Check to make sure that your backup power is set up. Here you can see my gateway. I've got a large battery here that's all the time running as a battery backup. And set a schedule for yourself. Set a reminder to go in and periodically check the battery level. Make sure it's being charged. Do some tests. Try literally unplugging the power from the wall to make sure that, hey, your gateway stays up and operational. In the event of an emergency, it may end up being that the most important place for you to be is sitting right in front of your gateway, monitoring it, making sure that it's staying up there and it's allowing all of that traffic from the rest of your team and those around you to be able to pass that traffic through. So deploying may not be running out and trying to go into some location where you're going to try and like save the day, because for the most part, our job is to support those of the folks who are in charge, who are driving the situation, making sure everything is taken care of. We're there to support them, and that might be just maintaining the infrastructure that helps facilitate the communications. But ultimately, the biggest key is making sure that you're safe and that you're well aware of what is going on. With that, what we'll do is, if you're here inside of the Zoom, hang around for the after party. We're going to open up the mics, take your questions, and we usually go for anywhere from an hour to 2 or 3 hours. So if you are, if you'd like to join us in the Zoom for any of the after parties, be sure to go on to wavetalkers.com. Down at the bottom of every page, there is a join us link. We only send out one email a week. It joins you onto our email list, and we send you out the link for the live Zoom audience. Coming up next week, we are going to do a show about helping you prepare for Shakeout. Shakeout is coming on the 19th of October. 2023, and we'll be helping you and your organization to be able to set up in order to be able to participate. And then on the 19th, we're going to do, Thursday morning, we're going to do a special live show where we do a Winlink activation for the Shakeout drill. So if you're on our join us list, then we will send out an extra email that week and let you know of the special link for that particular episode that will be on October 19th. It's a Thursday morning. It'll be about 10 a.m. Pacific time on that day. So with that, we'll say 7-3 to everyone who is joining us live. Thanks a lot for joining us, and we will see you next week.